Way number 47 is the penultimate way to wisdom of the 48 ways of wisdom. Our sages, again, we have to appreciate this. They did a tremendous service for us. The great giants of Torah, absolute legends of Torah, they codified for us 48 different pathways that we can undertake to achieve, to unlock, to acquire the Almighty's divine Torah. And we're up to the second to last, the penultimate way to wisdom, HaMechaven es Shmu'aso. So what this means, it's not exactly clear what it means, but how it means to target or to direct your studies. It's not exactly clear what this means. And of course, the commentaries offer a bevy of different ideas of how to understand way number 47 to be precise, to be targeted in your studies. So the first idea comes from the Maharal. He has a little bit of a different version of this way to wisdom. He doesn't have HaMechaven es Shmu'aso, which means target. Instead, his text of the Mishnah reads HaMaven es Shmu'aso, who understands the teaching. And he explains that when you hear something, you study something, a way to wisdom is to not accept what you learn until you understand it. There are other religions that talk all about, we just accept it. Papal infallibility, authority, it's faith. Yes, it makes no sense. Yes, it's completely illogical, but we just accept it as faith. That is not our way. We don't do that. We don't accept the incompatibility with or between human intellect and the Almighty's divine Torah. We don't just say, well, this is our tradition and it makes no sense and it's illogical and it's flawed and we just do it nonetheless. Torah is not supposed to be illogical. It's not supposed to be faith-based, at least not the ideas of Torah. That's a different religion. Teachings are not supposed to be completely inaccessible. It's beyond human intellect. Now, of course, we all know that there is a class of mitzvos known as chukim. A chok is a mitzvah that makes no sense to human intelligence. Why we should not steal or murder or embezzle, that can make sense to us. But why we can't wear a garment that's half wool and half linen? A wool garment, that's fine. A linen garment, that's also fine. A garment that's half wool and half linen, that's a problem. It makes no sense. Someone is impure because they came into contact with the dead. And the way to resolve that is to take a red heifer and to slaughter it and to burn it and to make a huge pile of ashes together with other things and sprinkle it on day 3 and day 7. It makes no sense to us. And this is called in the Torah a chok, a mitzvah that makes no sense to us. But the commentaries are quick to remind us that the fact that it makes no sense to us, that doesn't mean that it's bereft of logic. Quite the contrary. It is completely logical. It's just that not all of us are capable of unbridled logic. Now what this means is the human of the human, the soul of the human is actually very, very spiritual. We don't see our soul. There's no way to measure it and to quantify it. It's invisible. But you pull the soul out and suddenly all you have is this lump of flesh that's completely useless. The best analogy for the soul and the body is hardware and software. If you have a device, you got a phone, you got a computer, where's the software? How do I find it? How do I pull it in? How do I pull it? You can't do that. You cannot visualize software. But if there's no software, the hardware is a paperweight. It's useless. I think the reason why the Almighty allowed the humans to invent computers and transistors and chips and operating systems, it's to create for us a perfect analogy of body and soul. Like if I install software, my computer will become heavier. But it's a completely different machine. But why doesn't it change in weight? No, it's invisible. But where is it? We understand. You interact with technology. There's a hardware and then there's a software and they work together. If you have one without the other, it's not useful. If you pull out all the software from the hardware, all you have is a hunk of metal. Same thing. Body and soul. If we were to look at our soul, the soul is way loftier than the loftiest of angels. If you were to look at the soul and you were to give it Torah, it would understand everything with crystal clarity. It will know exactly why a garment of linen is fine, a garment of wool is fine, but a garment of half linen, half wool is completely anathema. It's completely problematic. So we're acknowledging that it's illogical to us based upon our current configuration. That's okay. You have a body, okay? That's a problem, but that's the design. The design is that you have a body. Okay, so there's certain things that are not in your current orientation. You cannot really understand it. But that doesn't mean that we embrace the idea of just saying, oh, nothing makes sense and we're just doing it all because of some sort of tradition. We know the canonical example of a chok, of a mitzvah that makes no sense to us, is the red heifer. But scripture tells us that there was one person who did understand the red heifer completely. And that was Moshe. And the commentaries explain that Moshe was the most soul-based person who has ever lived, maybe with the exception of Adam before his sin. And he was at a level of human that was able to understand it. Because he was no longer suffering with the ill effects of having a body. And this is a big idea, and we've spoken about this in the past, but Moshe was someone that the Torah tells us, he buried himself. You look at Rashi's commentary in chapter 34 of Devarim. Moshe buried himself, which is a way of the Torah telling us he was not subject to death. Red heifer, that's the antidote to death, and therefore anyone who is associated in any way with the concept of death cannot fully understand it. Moshe is loftier than angels. He's like the most human of all humans. He has this unbridled soul, and he understood the red heifer completely. So I would rephrase it and say that there are parts of Torah that are beyond us, not because it's beyond human intellect, but because we're not human enough to understand it. We're so mired in sin and corrosion of the soul, of course, relatively speaking. We're so submerged into the world of the Yetzer Hara. We're so much more body than soul. That's why we can't understand it. But truthfully, as an ideal, Torah should completely match seamlessly with all the other creations of God. Torah should not in any way violate natural law. Not science, because science and Torah, of course, cannot be contradictory. They're both the handiwork of God. And of course, humanity, the ultimate creation of God. Torah and humanity are a perfect match. Which is why, of course, child, before they're born, the soul before birth, knows all of Torah, because it's the natural law of the soul. Of course, for the purposes of creating free will and creating the possibility for earning our greatness, we have the body, with the physicality, with the challenges of life. And that murkiness makes parts of Torah hard for us to understand. But the truth is, there's perfect compatibility between humanity and Torah. And if the Torah violates your intellect, if you don't understand it, it's not the mark of a sage to say, I simply accept it. Try to find out exactly where that hang-up is. Hamaven es shmuaso. One of the ways, way number 47 to acquire Torah. Understand it. Don't just accept it. Now again, if you reach the point where you understand it and you realize why you don't understand it because you're not Moshe, that's okay. But to just mail it in and say, well, it's beyond us, that's not the way to achieve a deeper level of wisdom. I saw one of the commentaries. I just enjoyed reading this. He says there's different types of ways to study. Don't be, this is a quote, don't be like those students who are chattering. His words, not mine, in Hebrew. Hametzafzafim. They're just chattering, they're talking, and they're speaking and they're studying, but they don't have the insight. They don't understand the roots and the essence. They could pay lip service to it, but it's going to evaporate. And yes, if you were to ask them a question, they could just spit it out word for word verbatim, but they don't really understand it. To understand it in your mind, not just in your mouth. And how do you do that? You might need to work hard to do that, right? You might need to review it and to really cogitate over it, to really understand it. To really understand it, not just about to say it, but to understand it. That is another way to interpret way number 47, ha-mechaven eshmoso. There's another idea that the commentaries suggest. There's a magnificent classification in the Midrash. Rabbi Judah the Prince was talking about all the different sages. And he was classifying the different sages. And when he got to Rabbi Akiva, he said, Rabbi Akiva is like a full warehouse, jam-packed warehouse. And then he would explain. Rabbi Akiva is he's like a farmhand who takes a big box or a big barrel, and he goes out and he starts collecting the different grains and the different fruits in the field. So he finds some wheat and he gathers some of the wheat, puts it in his box. And he goes a little further and finds some barley, gathers that, puts it in the box. And he finds some oats and he puts that in the box, and some spelt and he puts that in the box, and some lentils and he puts that in the box. So what does he have? He has a box full of all these miscellaneous different yields from the farm. And then he brings it home. Time to go back to the warehouse. Now, what do? If it was just me, I would just dump it on the floor. Okay, well, job's done, right? No. Rabbi Akiva, when he takes this bulging satchel of fruits from the field, he goes back to the warehouse and he begins to organize it. And he says, okay, let's take all the different wheat and separate it and organize it. This is where the wheat belongs. This is where the spelt belongs. This is where the oats belong. This is where the barley belongs. This is where the apricots belong. That's how Rabbi Akiva would study. When you hear ideas and you amass ideas, sometimes they're just jumbled together. And your work after you hear those ideas is to say, okay, now it's time to organize and classify and differentiate between the different subjects in a way that it's completely organized. Now, in my head, I know, okay, where does this come from? Where does that come from? And everything is separated out according to topic, categorized. Everything's arranged in a different format, not just the way you accept it. I accepted all the ideas and now I have a big jumble in my head. Okay, now I'm going to work really hard to try to organize them by topic and by concept and so on. And now I can very easily understand where something fits in the bigger picture. So the commentary suggests maybe that's what it's being hinted over here. You study, but now you target, now you're precise in it. Now you understand how it all fits in. Now you understand where it all belongs. my dear friend Bruce, everything he hears, he writes down and organizes it based upon a certain topic. So he has these thick books. All the Torah ideas, but it's all organized in his own way. That's an example of what the commentaries here are saying, way number 47. You can hear so much, but unless you do that work to figure out what category of an idea is this, and how does it fit into with some of the other ideas, and what is it similar to? What other ideas is it similar to? And so on. If you don't do that work, you may have a lot of information, but it's not very handy, and it's not very useful. And it can create even more confusion that may outweigh the benefit. Of course, we always want Torah. But there's work to do once you have it to organize it, and that is another idea in way number 47. And finally, Hamechaven es shmuaso can also mean where you intuit the teaching. You start off your career as a student. The babies, they're still all born ignorant. Is there a way to solve that? You work your whole life to amass, to understand, to learn, and the baby's born with nothing. Nothing. Ignorant. Okay, but that's the system that the Imari designed. The child begins their career as a student, and they're learning. And they first learn the basics, the ABCs, quite literally. And maybe they start learning the scripture and the Mishnah and the Talmud, and then they hear advanced lectures in the Talmud. At some point, it's a stage in their development is to take off the training wheels and to allow them to roam on their own. When do you do that? When do you stop going to lectures and start maybe making your own lectures? That's way number 47. Hamechaven es shmuaso. You study. This is the way it's done in every yeshiva, by the way. The lecture is only given after the students have studied it on their own. And the way you're supposed to do it is you're studying, let's say, 3 hours on one section in Talmud, and you're trying to understand it, and you're trying to kind of in your head create the lecture. And then you're finished studying, you go to the lecture and say, well, they're saying something completely different. The teacher, the legend, he said something completely different than I would have said. And now I see why. I hear the flaws with my approach. And here's why their approach makes so much more sense. So then after the lecture, you say, okay, let's put the pieces back together. This is what we had thought. This is what we had proposed initially. And here's why that maybe wasn't as sharp, as tight as it could have been. And this is why the lecture kind of clarified things for me. And now we have a way to approach it. And the next day we'll do the same thing. Next piece of Talmud. The next citation. And we'll study it and work really hard trying to understand it. Maybe kind of simulate the building of our lecture if we were to give the lecture. And again, we go hear the actual lecture. And again, we're upstaged. And again, we miss something and we overlook something. And that's going to happen for years. Every day you start off, you study, and then you hear the lecture, and then in the evening, you're kind of piecing it back together and saying, you're kind of upgrading your perception of that piece of Talmud. And you're slowly refining your nose. You're sharpening and honing your skills. And then one day, you arrive and you study for 3 hours with your study partner, and you think of how you would say it, and you think how you would prove it, and you kind of simulate the lecture, and you get there, and it's exactly what you said. And then it happens again, and again, and again, and again. Now you can take off the training wheels. Because now you've absorbed the teacher and the methodology and the mechanism and the systems in such a way that you're mechaven es shmuaso. You've targeted, you've intuited what the teacher would have said. When you can say exactly what the teacher would have said on your own, Now you've matured. You're now independent. And you should go on your own, not just to study this particular area of Torah. Now take that skill and apply it across the board. There's a famous letter written by Rashi where he writes, he's like, I never heard this from my teacher, but I know for sure what he would have said in this matter. In every situation, someone's mature in their Torah, as a student, they've reached that point of independence. They should know for sure what their teacher would have said, even if the teacher never explicitly opined on that matter, whether it's a matter in Torah or even it's a matter in life. Because after all, what's our life? It's the greatest dilemma of all. It's the greatest Torah dilemma of all. What does the Almighty want of me in my life? That too is a part of Torah. What should I do? How should I utilize my opportunities in my lifetime? A Torah teacher will give us direction and guidance. And I ought to be able, in every circumstance, in every question, in every crossroads that I face, I ought to be able to try to understand what would my teacher, my guide, what would they have said in this circumstance? That's a result of Hamechaven Eshbos. Way number 47. We are down to the last way to wisdom. We finished now way number 47. Hamechaven Eshmoso. He who targets, who's precise in their studies. And we said a variety of ideas, of course. We said, number one, don't just accept it as gospel. That's not our way. Organize it. Everything's classified. You pull it all in. Maybe it's a big mishmash, and now it's time for you to organize it yourself and finally mechaven to target your teaching to intuit what your teacher would have said. That is way number 47. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I want your questions, your comments, and your feedback. And of course, you can always send them to me via the email. Even though I've been a bit behind lately, I apologize. We're going to catch up to everyone, I hope. rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to receiving your insight and your feedback.